Grass. It's the largest irrigated crop in the United States. We grow 40 million acres of it. That's 3 times more than the amount of corn we grow. And not only do we irrigate the stuff, we spend time and energy mowing it and weeding it. We spend money and resources fertilizing it, applying pesticides to it. Culturally, grass became a thing a few hundred years ago because it was a mark of luxury. If you were rich enough to be able to devote land to lawn rather than to vegetables, that said something about your wealth. And now it's our default monoculture along our roadways, on our boulevards, and in front of our houses and office buildings, and yes, even in front of our churches. But the Kentucky bluegrass we typically plant as a monoculture is a desert for insects and animals. It doesn't provide food or shelter for them. Its root system is only about 2 inches deep, so it needs to be watered frequently. It doesn't help mitigate rainwater when we have a lot of rain, and doesn't capture carbon underground as efficiently as native grasses, whose root systems are measured in feet, not inches. Plus, we spend so much time on our lawns. Maybe not so much in my part of Ann Arbor, where no mow May has taken hold and people seem more willing to let clover and creeping Charlie and dandelions add color to their expanses of green, or ditch those expanses altogether. But in many parts of the US, a weed-free lawn is a source of pride, a mark of the effort put in by residents and landscapers to show how well they can keep their grass in check. But it's worth asking, why? Why do we always seem to have to do the hard thing, especially when the easy thing might actually be better? What are we out to prove? Why do we rejoice in growing tricky ornamental plants that don't belong there, that require pesticides and fertilizers to survive, as if our victory in growing them somehow proves we have bested nature? I remember a fad about 20 years ago where people were literally trying to grow palm trees in Michigan, trees that were incredibly unhappy and had to be dug up every winter and stored in conservatories. Why do we grow food in a way that requires a whole system of artificial fertilizers and pesticides when there might be a better but different way? Many housing associations forbid growing vegetables in your front yard. Why? Because towering plants bearing ripe heirloom tomatoes and peppers would put the neighbor's boring grass to shame? Today's story in Genesis has often been misused as a way to shame women, as an origin story that explains why women can't be trusted. I actually had someone tell me once that women shouldn't be pastors because of Eve and because of their womanly wiles. Yep, those were the actual words. As if Eve tricked Adam. But if you go back a little bit in the chapter, we see clearly that Adam was right there with Eve when the serpent offered the fruit of the tree of knowledge to both of them. It seems that Eve wasn't solely responsible for introducing evil and hardship into the world, but instead of the perfect world God would have given them, both she and Adam desired the godlike power and control the serpent told her the fruit of the tree would give them, and it was that desire for power and control that angered God. This, of course, resulted in the first ever game of I swear it wasn't me, and instead of taking responsibility, Adam threw Eve under the bus. Then Eve did the same to the serpent, and they all got an epic timeout. I would argue that, rather than an origin story about the wiles of women, this story tells us about our original sin, our desire for godlike power and control, and for our unwillingness to accept the responsibility that necessarily comes with such power. It's like God said, don't touch the hot stove. And then Eve tried it, and so did Adam, just because the serpent told them they couldn't know whether God was telling the truth unless they did the thing. So instead of living in harmony with the world that God had created, they set off on a course that put them on odds with it, always needing to prove their mastery of it. It's an ethos that has led to deforestation, habitat loss, soil degradation, pollution, and climate change. We keep doing it because we expect that somehow we will find a way to save ourselves from the impacts of our war with God's good gift of creation. Except that in the end, nature always wins. We think we are in charge, but the truth is that we never have been. We have done so much harm by trying to bring nature under our own control rather than paying attention to what the world around us needs from us as caretakers. It is the same when we try to control anything or anyone by means of coercion or violence. Often, collaboration and partnership is a much healthier means of moving forward. But just as God walked to meet Adam and Eve in the garden in the time of the evening breeze, God continued to stay with them, just as God continues to stay with us. Although many of our ancestors forgot that they could have lived in harmony with nature instead set about subduing it, the God who created Adam and Eve in God's own image continued to walk with them through times of joy and times of sorrow. One of the most difficult things we can do is realize that our power only reaches so far. There are so many things we can't fix. There are so many things we can't control. There are so many things we wish we could control that we were never meant to control. Jesus' words in today's gospel reading are cryptic and hard, especially out of context, but perhaps we can take his words in dialogue with our reading from Genesis. That being open to what God is calling us to rather than insisting on doing things our own way is how we live into our baptismal calling, into our identity as siblings together with Jesus, into our identity as children of God. It's hard to lead with love and compassion in a world that is often built around transaction and that sees strength in domination, control, and retribution. But God calls us to a life lived from a posture of love and compassion rather than one of struggle over power. A posture of love requires the vulnerability, curiosity, and strength to ask what is needed rather than declaring that we know what's best. Our human drive to constantly seek power and control can make us feel lost, but God always seeks us when we are most in need of being found. In finding us always and in constantly calling us back, God shows us how to live lives in harmony with each other and with the world around us. Amen.